Welcome to the SunDried Tomatoes Podcast. I'm your host and creator, Anthony Yoder. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find the audio-only version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher. Please follow, download, and subscribe where applicable. For those listening to the audio version, I also have a video version on the SunDried Tomatoes YouTube channel. Please subscribe there as well and check out other shows that will feature sports, brewing, food, and music, including my original series, Legends of the Diamond, Brewing the Facts, and of course, Random Reactions, a show where I talk about a news story from the past week and give my take on it in interesting ways. Season 2 is on the way, starting February 10th. There's also a fantasy football show with a twist from this past season, starring my fiancé here, which I'll introduce in a second. Quest for the Green Bowl, These Shadows of Chaos. Learn how my league did throughout the season while being mixed in with my epic sci-fi post-apocalyptic cosmic horror theme story, where we've all been transported into the future to win an ancient relic, our trophy, in order to save the world from chaotic living shadows. The lore-only videos are now available on the YouTube channel as well for those that don't really care about fantasy football. You can also follow me on Instagram at eclectic_Yotzo. That's ECLECTIC_IOZZO. I have companion pieces for my YouTube videos, and you can get to know me a little bit better as well. This month, I am joined by my beautiful fiancé, Alexandria Yoder-Fox, who's currently going for a master's in horticulture at the University of Minnesota. She's a creative person who also likes to paint art, which I have some of her art pieces.
Paint art?
Yeah. You're an artistic painter.
Yeah, okay.
I have to differentiate because some people paint walls.
Okay, that's true.
Some people are hardware painters.
You mean house painters?
Yeah, house painters. You're also an animal person, helping to rescue and spay and neuter cats, taking care of a colony in our backyard here. And we could get about that a little bit later. Also, you love video games, just like myself, including some of those old classics growing up. And I know this sounds like a lot of random things, but since a new random reaction season is coming up here, I thought it would be fun to talk about some horticulture with your horticulture background, plus, your work with the neighborhood cat colony and video games. We're getting all crazy on this podcast. I actually did a funny playthrough on some old classic Atari games on episode 10 of Random Reaction Season 1. You can go check that out on my YouTube channel. But Alex, are you excited to talk about all these random things today?
Yeah. Yes.
I like how you're just like, yes, like it's the radio interview that you did a couple years ago.
I'm not great on camera.
Yeah.
But I'll try.
Are you great on mic? Because that's really what this is about. So
I can ham it up for the mic.
Yeah, forget about the camera.
It's hard to forget about the camera.
That's what most people
It's
say.
2022.
It changes our brains, right? It's like you know that the camera's on you.
Yeah, I'm being watched. I feel like
that's why Candid Camera was such a crazy show when we were kids. I don't even know. Do they still do Candid Camera? I don't even know. But
all I know is the jingle, but I'm not singing it.
Yeah.
So
well, that's up to you. So
no.
Of course, we're gonna have our fun topic later with video games. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun with that. But I did want to get a little bit about horticulture, and of course, I know this, but you're studying right now. It's also winter in Minnesota, but it's not too early to plan for your garden, and I'm sure you're already thinking about your garden, as you've done many gardens. But tell everyone about your what got you into horticulture. It started kind of as a hobby, and then you decided. And you learned a lot just by doing things, and then you decided, you know what, I'm going to get a degree in this. So what kind of went into that?
Well, it started before it was a hobby. It was just something that I would help my mom with. When I was younger, we always had a garden. My grandpa always had a garden. My grandma grew up on a farm. She always loved growing vegetables, no matter where she lived. As she got older, that got passed on to my mom. My mom passed it on to me. It was always so close to my identity as a person that I never really even thought about it being a career. It was just sort of a part of who I was, a part of my personality. And when I was first diagnosed with endometriosis in 2018, those are our cats playing. There was a lot of unknowns for me during that time, and I was experiencing a lot of chronic pain. And one of the only things that kind of got me up and motivated was thinking about what I was going to do with my plants that day, or what I was going to do with the garden plot. It was actually a farm that I was helping to cultivate, I think between 2016 and 2018.
Yeah, what was that called again?
It was called Bare Bones Cooperative Farm.
Yeah,
it was not started by me. It was started by a number of wonderful people who were part of a really cool community of growers in the Madison area. And the co-op that I used to live in, I lived in a housing co-op for a few years. They acquired sort of the seeds and the rights to kind of continue the operation. And I just started volunteering with my friends to learn what it was like to grow and sell organic produce. And that was kind of my first experience on growing things for money. Not that we made a lot, but it was a really cool learning experience that I wouldn't trade in for the world.
And you guys kind of got a grant for that, right?
Yeah, we had to apply. We wrote an application for a grant. It was through Silverwood Park, which was established in honor of I can't remember her name, but she entrusted this land to the town of Edgerton, and she wanted it to be used for education and environmental preservation and kind of like all kinds of different activities that had to do with getting the community together in a good way. And so part of that land was turned into plots that you could basically apply to grow food on, or flowers, or whatever you wanted. So,
yeah. And there was other people that had plots as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had been at the farm. It was actually pretty amazing to see how much that you guys had.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I met some of the people that were in it, and everyone seemed like cool people, but it was just crazy to think that it was just a couple of people there, and you had to.
Yeah. Well, there were some very knowledgeable people who had far more experience than I, who were kind of, designing how everything was going to be laid out and which rows were going to be dedicated to which crop and how we were going to manage and irrigate everything. And I was just kind of there to learn and do the best I could with the physical labor, which was hard for me to do at the time. But as I got stronger since, I realized that a big motivation for me in my recovery from my surgery and all of the things that come along with having stage 4 endometriosis was just wanting to get back out there.
Yeah.
So that was a big part of it for me.
Yeah, I remember before it took a little bit to kind of get everything organized. I feel you didn't necessarily have the irrigation hoses and everything at first, so I was helping you water these things by hand, which was pretty intense. We had to carry buckets from this shed in the farm and walk over there.
There was a number of wells on the property that were really wonderful and ancient at the same time. And so sometimes we had issues with trying to figure out, when to put in pipe irrigation and when not to, but we figured it out.
Yeah, it came out pretty good. I remember eating some of it. I remember you brought a whole box of garlic home, which is being an Italian. I made a lot of sauce with that garlic.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was really nice looking garlic. Yeah, and then
the thick stalks and everything. Yeah, a lot of good stuff. You talked about how you kind of learned how to sell a little bit too, kind of, even though you didn't make a lot.
Yeah,
that is kind of a whole part of horticulture. A lot of people don't really understand. Some people will grow things in their backyard, or they'll go to the farmers markets, the CSAs and things like that. But they might purchase something, but they don't think about the behind the scenes. So, I mean, what was that like? Yeah.
Well, it makes you realize how much work goes into harvesting the food that we eat every single day. And there's just so much hard labor that goes into the production and the harvesting of food. I think people mistakenly believe that since it's called industrial ag, that machines do all the work. But it's still mostly done by incredibly strong individuals who are usually not paid for the amount of time they're devoting. They have to work during, fire season in California. They have to work during, near hurricane-like conditions in Oregon and
deal with different things. I mean, if you do, a lot of people don't realize, but when you do organic growing, you can't use certain things that people use, pesticides and things, and you can get it done, but it does make it difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and of course, the standards for what is considered organic is constantly susceptible to the government changing their mind. So that makes things even more complicated.
So, of course, so many people might have gardens where they buy things that are already grown and they start their gardens that way. I see a lot of people with that. You actually plant from seeds, and I'm guessing that kind of goes back to the collective that you're a part of as well, because you guys grew everything from seed, and you've done that before. Mm-hmm. But you've grown pumpkins here in our backyard, squash, varieties of flowers, including dahlias, very pretty dahlias, herbs, carrots, asparagus, kale, etc. I could go on and on. You've grown a lot of different things.
Yeah.
A lot of people maybe don't realize, but what do you think is the main difference to essentially making a garden from scratch as opposed to designing a garden from someone else's work that they started? What's some of the main differences?
So I guess for a lot of people, their garden they want it to look a very specific way, and they have really strong visions as to what they want to grow. And sometimes just cutting out the process of starting it from seed means you have even more time during the growing season to really fill out what you want it to look like. And that's especially true if you really like growing annual crops. So that's like, zinnias are a really popular annual flower. Cosmos are very popular. But then you also have begonias, impatiens. So those are things people like to buy from the store because they're really showy. They're pretty. And you buy them every year when you live in when you live in a climate where there's 4 seasons. If you lived in California, I suppose you could just have the same annuals, growing all the time. They would never die. Yeah. But when you live in a place like Minnesota
or
Wisconsin, your annuals, they always die eventually. And so that kind of started making me more curious about what it would be like to have a perennial garden, or what it would be like to have a mostly perennial garden with maybe some biennial food crops, like carrots, for example. Those are actually biennial. There's also a lot of crops that you can grow into the winter if you keep them, a certain temperature using maybe some straw or some covering like kale, certain lettuces, beets, for example. So these are things that you might even be able to keep growing through the winter using like some type of a hoop house or even a cold frame. And the cool thing about that is that when you're not constantly putting new plants in and removing old ones, you're actually building soil quality over time. And the goal for me would be to find a way to increase soil health. And that's usually called restorative ag. The idea is that instead of just continuously using the soil as this temporary growing medium, you're actually treating it like it's part of the larger ecosystem, which it is. And so soil health is something that everyone can agree a really important thing right now, because across America, it's degrading quickly because of just some really old-fashioned industrial farming practices that were really great for feeding the most amount of people the cheapest, which kept us all living through some really difficult times. But it's not actually really great for the future of food production or ecosystem preservation. So that's kind of why I started doing some experiments in my own garden to see how I could grow certain things, without having to rip stuff up every year.
Yeah, I've been impressed with some of the things you've done because, I've seen people grow things, and I've tried to grow herbs from seeds and sometimes succeeded, and sometimes I don't know if the seeds were old or what happened, but nothing grew, and I was a little disappointed.
Well, the biggest challenge when you're starting seeds in a place like Minnesota is getting them adequate light during the months when they're still inside. You have to start the seeds inside early. And you certainly can't be doing that here in April because it's still only like maybe 15 degrees outside.
I don't know if it's that cold in April.
Sometimes it is.
Sometimes we get snowstorms.
Yeah, and even one snowstorm in April that kills your seedlings. They have
inside.
Exactly. And it's difficult to get them adequate light even if you have the proper grow lights. So that's what people struggle with the most. And it takes some creative problem solving and some being comfortable with a little bit of clutter. But
yeah, if you have space,
you just have to. It's trial and error. I usually do multiple sets
just in case.
Just in case. If certain seedlings get too leggy because they didn't have enough light, I'll start them again. It's also a great idea to direct sow. Just put the seeds directly in the ground, especially when you live in a place like this. Like the minute the ground is thawed, if the species can handle it, you can kind of just throw them right in the ground, cover them with a little straw and say a prayer. Usually that works really good.
Yeah.
I'd like to do more of that this year.
Which, to be honest, when you first told me about the randomness of straw, how it could like burst in flames or like internally combust.
I didn't tell you that. I think you looked it up you found it on the internet.
It was pretty intense. So
I've never heard of that actually happening.
Of straw and stuff, you have to keep it dry, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, it does mold.
It would be a little insane to be like, this seems a little hot. And then you put your foot through and you're like engulfed in flames.
Well, why don't you explain what you're talking about?
To people that don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just read it up, so I'm not an expert on this at any means, but from what I've read, if something happens with the moisture, if the straw itself if it's still, baled
too
up
compact
and compacted,
yeah,
and it gets moisture in it, it actually can start to create a rise in the temperature in the center of the bale. And what happens is it could catch on fire. It essentially internally combusts. So It catches on fire, and you might not know because it's inside the bale. And then, you go to put your hand or your foot on it, and suddenly you're like engulfed in flames because you collapse into the center. So it's
that sounds like
you're not
that's
actually
like a horror story.
Yeah, you're not actually engulfed in flames.
What really happens is that it sometimes, causes people's barns to burn down when they're not aware of it.
Yeah,
that's usually people aren't just falling into
but that is
flaming balls of straw.
Yeah.
And you're sure this was straw and not hay?
It was both. That would be a good song though. Flaming balls of straw, flaming balls of hay.
I guess I get for some kind of,
some sort of farm
county
song.
Band. Yeah.
Hey, it's better than some of the crap that they have out there. So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So obviously, growing from seed, getting into horticulture, we're also in trying times right now. Of course, I feel like learning how to grow your own food seems pretty important with everything that's going on right now. But I do have to say that there's a crazy stigma, and we've talked about this many times with like homeowners associations and even the city sometimes having ordinances that make it actually difficult to use your land to grow food or other things, especially the front yards, and they want everyone to have that that nasty turf grass that as a kid, I was always like, why do people waste their land with this stupid grass? Like, I didn't like it. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And what do you think needs to change in the government?
Well, I'm not going to talk about turf grass because that would lead me on too many tangents.
Yeah,
but I will say,
you did a thesis on that, I believe. So.
It's not, well, yeah, technically, but it's, anyway, there's mainly two barriers that are pretty universal for people in this country who might want to grow their own food, but for whatever reason, they can't, or they're unable to. And one is that they don't have enough time. We live in a country where we're kind of expected to work when we're awake and when we're fed. And so there's not a lot of extra time, especially if you have family, if you have things that you need to take care of, children, pets, elderly family members. If you live in a multi-generational home, sometimes that can ease the pressure. But of course, multi-generational homes are, they're not what's kind of the media's favorite way of portraying the American family. It's always encouraged that when you get to be a certain age, you move out and you buy your own house. Well, it's pretty hard for two people who are both working full time to pay their mortgage to also grow their own food. So families have to make sacrifices if they want to start growing their own food.
And you're talking about sustainable food, right? Like not just growing a couple of crops.
Even just a couple.
Yeah.
Even just a couple. If you're not really sure where to cut corners, you end up with a lot more work than what it's worth.
So organization.
And then people, and it's not part of the education system. We're not really teaching children these things in school. So unless their parents' culture, the culture of their family teaches it to them, they're not going to know. People aren't going to know where to start. It's very intimidating. Mm-hmm. So that's just the first barrier. The second barrier is that most cities in the United States have regulations that really dictate what you can and can't put in your yard. And these are holdover from, I guess, a time when I guess they wanted people to be spending as much money as possible on products that were grown here in the United States. And turf grass is one of them. And it was kind of an Americana thing. Like you put the grass in your yard. And there's also a lot of really shady colonial roots with turf grass. And I don't even want to get into that.
It's just nuts because there are natural grasses. Like turf grass isn't even necessarily natural to most of our places.
No, it's not. It's not. Most turf grasses are not even native to the United States. They're just grown here and then given to people to put in their yards because they can withstand a number of different temperature issues. Like say there's a drought. Well, there's turf grass that people buy specifically in, say, the southern United States in drought prone areas because it stays green. But of course it's not native and it doesn't, it's kind of like a biological desert. There's not really as many organisms, because of that, because it's not really supposed to be there.
But it's the stigma, right? Dandelions are weeds, but some people make tea out of them. So
yeah, dandelions are fascinating plants and they're totally harmless. But, there were ads in the 60s and 70s that were put out in all the newspapers that shamed people into basically killing them with herbicides because, as these ads would say, like only poor people eat dandelions, only poor people have dandelions in their yard. A successful American has a manicured lawn and it's there's a lot of problems with it,
especially since we now have some of those products in lawsuits because people got cancer from them. But
yeah, that's a whole other story.
Whole other rabbit hole.
That's a whole other story. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't cases where pesticide and herbicide use is really important, but in general, applying it to places where children are supposed to play. Mm-hmm. not a really good idea.
We see it walking around our neighborhood. There's several places where they have this tiny little sign in the corner of the yard that says like, keep your pets and don't, because there's chemicals on this grass, and you look and it's just this green grass and there's not anything else growing on it. But then you realize I barely saw that, and it was in one corner of the entire lot.
Right.
How is that okay?
Well, because the way that these products are regulated by the government is as if it is a one-time exposure. So you're basically, the calculations that the scientists are doing are saying people who are exposed to this quantity during this period of time, whether it's through application or after the application is done, they'll be fine. We've done the calculations, we've done the tests. It's not going to hurt you. But what they're not doing them on are lifetimes worth of exposures.
Not to mention that might happen.
Yeah, not to mention what it's like for people, again, who work in the ag industry, who plant and tend and harvest our food, who have to continuously use these products day after day after day. That's an even higher lifetime exposure. That's not even something that's almost covered by any of the current studies that have been done. And anecdotally, we see a lot of people with certain kinds of cancers who have spent far more than their fair share of their lifetime being exposed to these products. So, it's complicated, but
yeah, it is a complicated thing.
The problem with my main issue with turf grass is that in order to maintain it, it's usually important for people to use products that can actually harm them. If you want it to look green, if you want it to be weed free, you have to use post-emergent herbicides. So that's going to be anything that attacks anything that's a broad leaf. So anything other than a grass. So that's literally
almost everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the challenge.
And those things are if they are not conducive to certain kinds of life, then you have to ask yourself, why do I want to be sitting on it and have my kids playing in it? That's my issue.
Yeah.
It's okay if it's for decoration, right? If this turf grass is being used for decorative horticulture purposes, I understand that. But in parks where kids are supposed to play, in people's lawns, it makes me very hesitant.
Not to mention the sort of turf grass I always thought that it hurt. Like, walking barefoot, I never wanted to do that on that grass. But when people had like literally like crabgrass or some of those flatter grasses or just ground cover, I found myself not caring as much being in the yard barefoot,
Yeah, because it's not as itchy. But there's sports that people play, like golf, for instance, where the kind of turf grass really matters because it actually changes the way that the ball moves. So I'm not even
a lot of chemicals on them.
Yeah, they do.
It's probably one of the things that's the worst thing about golf is the fact that the golfers don't realize it. But you talk about that long-term exposure. That happens to a lot of golfers.
There's higher rates of uterine cancer in female professional golfers.
I don't want to be a buzzkill. I know some people like to golf, and I'm not saying anything bad about the sport, but the thing is that is something we should talk about. I think that this shows the importance that horticulture is, and you talked about it maybe not being in school. I think it should be more in like high schools. I think kids should learn this stuff at a younger age. Like, why aren't we teaching our kids the importance of something that literally is life-sustaining? Like, we need it.
You mean growing plants?
Growing plants.
It's also a very ancient human thing, right?
Yeah.
So people have been collecting seeds and growing plants as they moved and migrated for, honestly, since we could probably carry our infants with two hands. So it's really important to kind of, I guess, what was I going to say?
And this is also the anthropology in her. She has a degree in anthropology as well.
Oh God. I guess my point is that one of the reasons why I wanted to go into horticulture is because I think more people would be able to grow plants to sustain their lives, whether it's actual food or herbs because it's herbal medicine, or because it's an ornamental plant that they love and that brings them joy. More people would do that if they had the time and the resources, and if they lived in cities that allowed them to do so.
Yeah.
So I want to see an America where more people have the privilege to grow what they please.
And think about neighborhoods kind of getting together. I've seen it before where maybe there's like a plot or something that everybody in the neighborhood could kind of get together, and then they kind of start their own co-op just for their neighborhood, you know.
They can be very effective. The issue is that, you know, there's sometimes because of the way that they're managed, there's opportunities for barriers to access even in those community run plots.
Yeah.
So, you know, they can only so my real hope would be for everybody to just honestly be able to grow what they please on their property.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't really understand what the point of owning property is if the government still gets to tell you that you can only put turf grass on it, something that has no environmental benefit, something that doesn't interact with any of the native food webs, something that is literally fairly useless outside of its aesthetic, and the fact that like some people really like to sit on it because it makes them feel like there's maybe less bugs, or maybe they like the way it feels. That's fine. If you want to grow turf grass, fine, go right ahead. You should have the right to do so. If you don't, however, neighborhood associations and city councils, I don't feel really should have the right to tell you otherwise. That's a little weird. It's this weird.
Some people get arrested. Some people get fined crazy amounts of money. I mean, in the news recently, there's that judge that shamed a cancer patient because they couldn't cut their grass. Like, it's just ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
the judge has since apologized, but only because it was caught on video and put everywhere and went viral. I guarantee you that judge wouldn't apologize afterwards.
Right. Well, you have our current justice system is, as we all know, very problematic. And unfortunately, the roots of policing what people grow are like rooted in colonialism and like Jim Crow era politics. So there's a lot of problems with these particular regulations, and they represent like decades upon decades of just basically inhibiting people from actually owning what they own.
Yeah.
It's like the subtext here, you just paid off your mortgage, congratulations, but you can't put the strawberries in the front because we don't want homeless people to have access to food. You know, I mean, we don't want them to.
When we lived in Madison, one of the reasons why people couldn't have like fruit trees, I believe, was because of the homeless. The homeless people can't.
Right.
They'll congregate and eat the apples. Like, okay, so what? like, okay, wouldn't that help the homeless people?
If they were so concerned, if community leaders were so concerned with edible plants being used by homeless and being attracted to residential areas they didn't belong in because of it, then a really great solution to that, even though their paranoia is really classist and fucked up, a really great solution would be to just designate a certain public park to being an urban food center, a place where there were edible plants aplenty and people could harvest and forage what they wanted at will.
Mm-hmm.
They've actually done this in certain cities.
I bet, yeah.
It works fine. It definitely is something that could be a really great solution. Yeah. But again, it would mean designating a piece of property that the city owns into something that wouldn't be making the money.
And that's what
no one wants to do, right? Because every single plot needs to be zoned so that it can make someone money.
And that actually is a nice segue into conservation, because I mean that also is a little bit about horticulture as well, kind of having the correct plants and the correct habitats for everything. But you know, we could talk about it forever. The government wants to take down areas to build places, single family homes that people are going to pay taxes for them. And, you know, some people might argue, well, but then that's bringing taxes into the city. And the thing is I've seen cities do this, and I've never seen it. The roads still are terrible. There's still the parks still aren't that clean. You know, it's just, there's no main street to make well in a lot of these towns as well. So it seems like they're saying it's to make money, but I don't know where the money is going. You know, I'm not sure. You know, there's still chlorine in our drinking water. So I just don't understand that, you know, what really is happening. And again, we could go down conspiracy theoryality on that one.
Well, I mean, a great way for any city council or local government to fix the public suspicion that the money isn't being spent properly is to just be transparent.
Yeah, that would help.
But for some reason, that's not what I think most Americans would really love to know where their tax dollars were actually going. None of us really do know. And that's kind of the problem.
Every council video that there ever is, and they'll discuss certain things, but they don't ever show us the spreadsheet, you know?
Right.
It's not available online for all of us. Now, like a reporter might be able to get it with the Freedom of Information Act, but even there, they're trying to stop that. And there's a lot of journalists that are stalled constantly. Or you're forced to pay fees that the reporter might not have at that time, especially in a smaller newspaper. So it definitely becomes a problem. But there are places, and one that you volunteered at, Bellwyn Conservancy, that they acquired all this acreage, and they do a great job of having just this nice land of all these different things. And you've volunteered here to do different things, you know, with they have events there, and you know they're really into the whole bison thing and bringing them back. And one of the other things that I wanted to get into about the horticulture, and you did this at Bellwyn, you know, to help them out for events, illustrating certain things. And you could illustrate insects and things like that, but you could also illustrate plants. It's kind of a big thing, and you've done that as well. With your art background, you know, doing different things. So, and you've had shows, paint, you know, some of your paintings in shows and different things like that in Madison before. But you know, you like to draw on your skill at it. So what kind of goes into that? Is that something you're also interested in horticulture, kind of that area that it is needed? You know, it goes in textbooks, you know, it goes for research and things like that.
Yeah. So what I like to,
I mean, is that something that you think is very important? Do you think that's something that you would continue down into that to that area, and anyone else that is an artist and may be interested in something like that as well? Like what, you know, what were some of the things that you enjoyed while you did that?
Well, I think botanical illustration is really important but I don't think it should be something that just people who have natural talent in the arts should do. I think drawing something that you're studying is a really important teaching tool. So if there's something you really want to learn, diagramming it for yourself, trying to understand how all of its moving pieces work together. That was how I learned as a kid. It's how I learn as an adult. And
can help you plot your garden too, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it can. If you kind of understand the working mechanisms between plants, and the really special parts of each species, then you can kind of zoom out and figure out exactly how things can interconnect in a way that will make less work for you as the gardener. And that's ultimately what I want for everybody, right? The biggest yield for the least amount of work. I mean, because American families were exhausted, like we're sick of surviving in this constant state of raggedness and like exhaustion. And if people are going to be able to grow food for themselves, it's going to have to take the least amount of effort possible for the best result. So I think my background in art will probably serve me very well as I maybe create my own business model.
Yeah. I mean, other people could use that as well. It is. I think it is something cool. I think it also adds to the enjoyable part of it as well, right? Like you could have fun doing this. Like, yeah, it's hard work. You're gonna be tired if you do this, working in the garden for, especially early on when you really got to make sure everything's going well. You got to water things. We had a drought this past year. I know you were in the yard a lot because of the drought. It was causing a lot of problems. I'm sure it was causing a lot of people problems.
Yeah.
But it also could be enjoyable. I mean, yeah, it's hard work, but you could have a good time. And I think having, adding those different elements could also kind of add to that enjoyability.
Yeah. Well, there's this idea that you have to get everything perfect. And that's not the case. The cool thing with plants is that if you learn enough about them, you can kind of figure out where you can cut corners, right? And let the plant do the majority of the work for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in people growing things for, to win like the American Kennel Club of Roses contest, right?
Yeah.
I'm more interested in people being able to grow to their own expectations sufficiently, whether that's having enough tomatoes to make a couple of jars of salsa or a couple of jars of sauce to keep over the winter, or whether that's because they really, really, really want to grow this specific kind of gladiola that reminds them of their grandma and they keep having a pest destroy it. Like those are the things that I really care about, not sort of like the textbook horticulturalist values with the capital H that only works at like the conservancy. Plants will do the work for you if you just kind of grease the skids in certain ways. And that's what I'm really interested in figuring out how to streamline for people. Because we all live in different climates. We all have different soil. We all have different growing constraints. Some of us literally are going to be growing things in buckets because the dirt in our backyard is so contaminated by industrial pollutants that there's no other choice. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
That's not what that means. It just means that you're going to have to take other factors into consideration, and buying a book from the bookstore on how to grow tomatoes probably isn't going to serve you as good as somebody who lives in, a property with like perfect soil quality and zero pollutant ratios. So,
not to mention, cities building highways over people's neighborhoods and essentially ruining their whole neighborhood.
Right.
Because the government does, they're just worried about A to B. They're not worried about, C underneath.
Right.
It's kind of a sad thing. Yeah.
The soil belongs to all of us, right? So we can all restore it and we can all utilize it. We don't have to just let local restrictions stop us.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of local restrictions, I also want to get into moving a little bit away from horticulture now in the conversation. You're also an animal lover, of course. And of course, there's a kind of hidden behind the rubber tree plant is our cat Kitty Hawk and our other cat Lulu's laying around somewhere. And yes, that's a reference to the fifth element, according to Ellis Multipass. But, you're essentially the lone person with some of us helpers that kind of, help you when needed. Taking the lead on caring for a cat colony that's just in our neighborhood that we didn't create. It's just been there.
It's been there for probably decades.
And you're like the pandemic's made it tough, but you've gotten some cats spayed and neutered, and you would like to get more so that we can stop the colony from growing.
Right.
And that's the key.
Right.
You don't want that happening. And I think some people might not really understand why this is important. And cities don't make it easy either. Police don't help. Like, there's no real help. The humane societies are all random in different places, and our humane society here doesn't really offer that much help. I mean, why is this important for us to do? Because it is important. I mean, it affects our ecosystem as well to have these random cat colonies. Not to mention the cruelty of seeing these house cats essentially have to live and die outside.
Yeah. I think for people to understand why it's an issue, they have to understand like the scale to which the problems eventually get. A few cats roaming your neighborhood that may or may not belong to your neighbors is not necessarily an issue. It is for those cats, and it is for the local population of small mammals and birds that they continuously assault. But it's not a super big public issue, like public health crisis. It becomes one when those cats are not neutered, because they reproduce a lot faster than people realize. And you can have multiple litters in 1 year from one female cat. These litters can have anywhere from like 1 to 6 kittens max. They sometimes all survive. So now you suddenly, within a 9-month period, have 6-7 cats where you had 2.
It balloons quick.
And the problem is they attract house cats. So if there's people in the neighborhood that have unneutered cats, or even just very curious cats that might be neutered but also might be curious, they're more liable, these colonies, to basically act like a magnet, so that other cats in the area will be attracted to the colony, where they can either catch diseases or become pregnant or impregnate another cat. And so, Mounds View has had a feral cat problem for many, many years. And when we moved here, I found out about it fairly quickly, just because I was observant enough to notice all of the cats that were clearly homeless, that were being fed by random people in their backyard. And there's not something inherently wrong with wanting to feed these animals, because they don't belong outside.
Yeah, there's no such real thing as an outside cat.
I mean, if you lived in the middle of nowhere and you had a farm, and you could kind of control where this animal went, I could understand how there would be more reason to have a permanently outdoor cat, especially a barn cat. I get that.
Yeah. And those are usually
they are sickly. They have many diseases. They maybe live a quarter of the lifespan that they would if they were indoors. And they're survivors, so they make it work, but they decimate local populations of birds. When you already have insect populations dwindling and therefore bird populations dwindling, the last thing that the birds need is like a nonstop assault from a colony of homeless cats that will continue to kill the birds whether they're fed or not. It's just their instinct. It's not the cat's fault. In places like Australia, this became such a problem for native and endangered animals being predated upon by these feral cats, that they had to murder thousands and thousands of feral cats.
And we could go.
And I won't get into the details of that, because it was very sad and very violent.
They did it to get rid of rats, I believe. They actually released the cats themselves. They did it to themselves.
Well, I'm not exactly sure of the details of how it began, but however it began here in America and in communities all over. I mean, even in Minnesota, a place where the winters are regularly dipping into negative 20 plus wind chill, you have homeless feral stray cat populations skyrocketing right now. And it's because local leaders don't know what to do. They don't know how to control the population. So there's been a lot of different methods proposed. There's something called TNR, which some people believe wholeheartedly in and other people don't. I don't fall on that issue anywhere, because I still consider myself somebody who just is learning and trying to do the best that I can as one person. I do know this: if you live in an area like we do, where you have a lot of homeless cats, if you take a few of them and neuter them and give them to the shelter, that's a great success story, right, for those cats. Unfortunately, it also means that there will be more cats to fill that place. So the way that colonies work is kind of like a pride of lions. And when a male cat is suddenly not there anymore, another stray feral male will come in and fill the place. So you will always have more cats to feed, more cats to take care of, unless you can start to stabilize the colonies and have people in charge of caring for them in situ, if you know what I'm saying. Like, the cats don't necessarily all need to be given up for adoption. Some of them can stay, especially if they're healthy, they're well cared for, they get medication, and they have, acceptable places to keep warm and have access to water and love, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. The problem is that when I work with the Humane Society, I have to pay for everything out of pocket, because if you don't, then you're using their program that was specifically designed to basically get as many uncared for cats off the street. It was a great idea, but unfortunately, when you're someone like me who is living in a place where there's colonies and colonies of these homeless cats, you don't actually want to keep giving them cats. You just want to neuter the ones that are in your area or spay, right? And then that's it. Then you bring them back. You bring them back to hold that place, and to hopefully not increase the population or encourage more growth, because that can happen too, right? The moms can suddenly see there's no male around. Well, I need to pop out a bunch of more kittens now, right? There can be an incentive for even more kittens to be born. So it's a really delicate balance, because in order to use their free services, you have to sign away basically the rights to these cats permanently, and you don't get to decide what happens to them. And often, if they're friendly and they're healthy enough, the Humane Society keeps them and adopts them off, which is wonderful. No complaints about that, except the fact that it doesn't solve the colony issue.
Yeah.
And because the city won't do anything about it, and they're like,
not a lot of legislation, and a lot of them ignore it. So
the police don't even respond when there are cats that are hit by cars. They are not supposed to, because I guess it's one of those issues that has become so large that now the council's way of dealing with it is just completely ignoring it. So you have people like me who are trying to do what I can with the resources available to me. But again, the resources are all very capped. And there's just, in certain parts of the country, there's a ton of TNR organizations or stray and feral cat advocacy groups. There's not a lot of that up here in Minnesota, especially outside of the Twin Cities. So it's rough. It's a delicate situation.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole of the problems that this has for a while. I think bringing a little bit of knowledge to people, maybe a little bit of just awareness that these things are going on, I think is important. So, I mean, from anywhere from growing food to taking care of the colonies and your neighbor that might be there, to taking care of your own pets, whatever. But, I do want to stray the conversation into a couple more fun things here, since I could tell you're going down the rabbit hole and getting all passionate, which is great. We love it. Video games. I love video games, and you love video games. We play a lot of video games, kind of to distract ourselves sometimes from the crazy things that are going on and all of our duties, and all the things that make us want to scream into a pillow at night, which I'm sure other people have these problems as well. And it's kind of funny. There's a stigma with video games, I feel, still, even though our generation might be the one that it's like we're going to probably play forever. But we do have friends that maybe stopped playing because they had other things going on. It's like, it's hard for me to think that I'll stop completely. I mean, yeah, there's other things that we have to do, but there's always time.
But we don't have children.
That's
so
true.
that's
we
a
don't
big.
have children yet.
That's a big.
Yeah, a lot of our friends might have quit because they have kids. Although I would probably play with my kids, I would use that as
right, but they can't play as newborns.
That's true. That's
honey.
true.
They can't play video games as babies.
Yeah,
so you've got quite a few years to wait.
Quite a few years to wait. But I'll be back if we ever have kids there. But when you talk about getting lost for a few hours, relieving stress, having some fun or whatever, it's really fun. And you've been playing Skyrim, of course, again with the 10th year anniversary that just came out. You got all that new content, trying to go good at it. I'm randomly playing Fallout 4, but we also play a lot of old school games. So I do want to, what is it about video games you enjoy? Like, how much fun is it? And when you think about real life, like we were just talking about, horticulture and like taking care of like the cats in the neighborhood, video games is just leisure. So what about it do you think is important to have to you right now at this point?
Well, it's just it's a way for me to become sufficiently distracted in stuff that has nothing to do with my real life.
Yeah, because it could be tough.
It's none of it has to do with real life, thank God. Right. But it's fun. It's still fun.
Yeah.
And you don't have to think about anything you don't want to think about because you're fully engaged with whatever it is you're doing that, again, has nothing to do with your real life. Yeah. So it can be a really great mental break for people, myself included, who happen to be, overthinkers, ruminators, detail-oriented perfectionists. Of course, that still carries over into my video games.
I've seen her for hours on her settlements. So meticulously placing that vase in the corner.
Yeah, Skyrim's the physics in Skyrim is, you kind of have to toss things onto the shelf if you want them to sit there.
I've seen you for 20 minutes trying to get one thing to be straight.
I'm really good at it now, if I don't say so myself. So I decorate all my houses in Skyrim. I have the Hearthfire expansion. I plan on having all 3 of the homesteads.
Plus all the new ones that just came out.
Then there's all the new homes with the anniversary edition. And I plan on literally decorating all of them. That's just like one of the parts of the game I really like.
Which is probably good because the next time we see an Elder Scrolls, we might be, Rip Van Winkle beards growing, how slow Bethesda is.
Bethesda. They kind of torture they torture their fans.
Yeah, I think games could be rewarding, just like you just said. It definitely helps you get away from the day to day. Maybe get lost in a fantastical place. I love sports, as you know from my podcast. Talk about sports a lot, so I play a lot of sports games too, as well as RPGs and things like that. And I'll even go back and play old school stuff. I'll go, play Madden '93 or MLB All Star '94 or something, or some of the old FIFA games on PlayStation. Like it's just. There's just something about even old school games, like even though the graphics aren't as good, or it's like whatever, it brings me back to my childhood. It kind of brings me back to maybe a simpler time to help me get away from life can be stressful. Things are going on. We're in a pandemic right now. If it wasn't for video games, I don't know what I'd do.
Yeah, this is year
and
year
we read
2
books too, but I'm just saying, and we watch shows and we go for walks, whatever. But video games is also something that kind of keeps us, I don't know, just out of our own heads, maybe.
Right, and I think, the problem is when I'm not playing a game, what else am I doing? Well, I'm staring at my phone. Mm-hmm. I'm staring at social media. I'm comparing myself to other people. I'm comparing my current situation, slouched over a microwavable burrito with a 12-hour-old cup of coffee, trying to do my chemistry homework, and I'm staring at my phone and I'm seeing people in all these exotic locations. Why the hell would I want to do that when I could just not be happy with my microwavable burrito and my sad chemistry homework and just finish it so that I can hurry and go play Skyrim and kill a bunch of trolls? That just sounds way better Because I don't have to think about what other people are doing, because guess what? It has no effect on my life.
Mm-hmm.
It also has zero effect on my life. And people like to say all the time, like, well, video games aren't real. Neither is any of the stuff they're trying to sell you on social media.
Yeah, I mean, Instagram isn't real.
What does it have to do with you? Like, nothing.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It's virtual reality as consumerism. That's all it is. And don't get me wrong, I'm on Instagram all the time because I like to watch people put on makeup for some reason. I like watching other people put on makeup.
Mm-hmm. I'm into board games as well too, which I think is another outlet that people can have if you don't want to be connected completely to the television and things like that.
And I like seeing what my friends are doing, like what my friends and my family are up to. I care about that, clearly.
That's probably that was the reason why social media was created, but it's used for other things.
But again, it's nice to have a third place you can go. Like, it's not your life, it's not someone else's life, but it's something that you're interested in and you do have control over it because you're playing the game. Mm-hmm. It's just not your life.
Yeah.
So it's great. It's really good to sort of push a little reset button at the end of the day and de-stress, whether it's by, like, bashing in the head of a dragon or reorganizing my bookshelf. It's just something to do.
Yeah, and I mean, too, you talk about getting lost in the world, creating. It could be an artistic thing, too, in some of these games, where you can create your own worlds, settlements. Sometimes you get to choose the dialogue you choose in the game now, some of the newer games. And I mean, it's like Charlie Day's character and It's Always Sunny. It's like when I'm doing good in the game, I'm doing good in life.
Yeah.
Because it distracts you for a second from the crap of everyday life that most of us have. I mean, all of us have things going on. All of us have stresses. And with all the things going on in the world right now, and there's not a lot of great things that you read the news every day. It's not always great. So it's good to have that distraction,
Small little wins. Also, like, they're absurd. Most video games have, like, some level of absurdity, and that's what makes them funny.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite old school games? I mean, I've been playing Mario again, because why not? I love platformers. We've played Crash Bandicoot a lot, including the new one, but the old ones as well. Obviously RPGs, Zelda, Secret of Mana.
So I
love Chrono
I was
Trigger.
a PS1 kid. That was the first gaming system that I owned. I was probably in elementary school, maybe second grade, when we got a PS1. I had never played a Nintendo system before. I knew nothing of Mario. I know, it's weird, right? But so my games were always like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Croc. Those are the things I played.
All fun platformers.
And then I really liked a very old RPG called Saga Frontier.
Other good games.
Which I absolutely loved, because you could play through the universe in, I think it was seven different characters you could play as, and their stories all kind of interweave together at different points, but you don't know that unless you pretty much play through each one. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. They all have different abilities, and the graphics are kind of ridiculous. It's kind of like I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like there's it reminds me of like old school claymation. Yeah. Even where there's like little characters that kind of move in a 3D atmosphere, but the backgrounds are very two-dimensional. Yeah. That's
kind of the old school graphics.
Yeah. I didn't care.
A lot of
I didn't care.
People that didn't grow up with it will be like, what's with these graphics? The thing is there's that connection to the childhood of playing, but also like the graphics don't really mean a lot if the game's fun. So like that's why I still would play some of the old games,
My friends had Nintendo systems and also like Sega Genesis, and like some of the games I really like to play at my friends' houses, where we would always play Tekken.
Yeah, Tekken.
The fighting games, just mashing buttons.
Mortal Kombat.
Mortal Kombat was fantastic. Also, when I did get an N64, I was in middle school.
You played the
Gauntlet Legends.
It was on PlayStation.
Yeah, I was a big fan of that. I was a big fan of Ocarina of Time, Zelda.
And I played PC games too.
I had Pokemon Snap, but I really didn't know how to play.
Collecting those Pokemon.
I was just kind of like, this is not my thing.
If you're not really into the universe too, like it's.
Well, I had a Game Boy, of course. I had the Frost one, the silver blue, the light blue one.
Yeah.
That was like special edition.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I've played so many random games, PC games too. I remember for the first time, it was like. I think it was on my aunt's computer that she had. She had Doom randomly, so I remember playing Doom.
I never understood.
Absolutely insane.
I didn't understand that game.
And then there was like a golf game. So I mean, games have been kind of there forever, and I love it. Obviously, there's some things like having kids where you might not be able to play games as much or at all for a couple of years. But I see myself being 75 and being like, "Oh, this game was cool." I think it's kind of our generation,
Yeah.
So I mean, we've talked about horticulture to colony cats to video games, pretty random, but that's kind of like my show, Random Reactions. You should check that out. But it's been great having my fiance here to come on the podcast. I wanted everyone to hear her wisdom and her wonderful banter that she has, right? Getting those brownie points, right?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, she's, of course, also in our fantasy football league. So she was in one of the episodes of the Quest for the Green Bowl Shadows of Chaos.
My name in the league is the Siamese Dream Cats, which is, of course, an amalgamation of my favorite album as a kid, which was Siamese Dream.
From the Smashing Pumpkins.
And my obsession with cats, of course, I've always had.
Of course.
Yeah.
And while you're not really into sports, you've kind of gotten into the league a little bit. Mm-hmm. Pay attention a little. And you do like some sports. I know you watch soccer with me. Everton FC, even though sad state of affairs there right now.
I love European soccer.
Who doesn't? More people should like European soccer.
I should. I love it. I love the fans. I love the atmosphere.
It's pretty awesome.
I love how even when drunken brawls erupt, it's a different kind of drunken brawl than in the United States. You
also can't drink in the stadiums because you have to drink outside on the in the atriums.
I half expect for most of the brawls in the United States to end with like someone being shot.
Mm-hmm. In the United States, you have people somehow jumping on the field and messing around,
right?
There's instances where people throw stuff on the field in soccer too, but they try to ban them for life. So
right.
They try to get that out. There was a dark ages time when people did that. There's a lot of things, but it is what it is. And you love you like the Olympics. I know that you'll watch the Olympics with me, especially the Winter Olympics.
I love the Winter Olympics,
and that's coming up, of course. So before we close this conversation, which I'm sure everybody's had fun just as much as me listening to this beautiful woman over here.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, I gotta keep going.
Oh my god!
I wanted to ask, with the Olympics starting February 4th. I know some, might be upset that it's happening with the pandemic, but it's still going on. There's nothing we could do. China's not going to postpone it. It's not even worth talking about all those types of things. So instead, I wanted to ask, are you excited about any particular events in the Winter Olympics? What's your favorite events?
I love watching figure skating. I like watching the curlers.
Yeah, curling's fun. Yeah.
I love the luge. I love watching people do luge. I love the skiing, the snowboarding. I love slalom, not so much. I kind of like the more
you like the crazy jumps.
X Games kind of thing. I used to snowboard when I was a kid, so I'm always just in awe of the talent. The half pipe. Yeah. Oh God. It looks like I love thinking about how much fun those people must be having, how good it must feel when they land, something that they've been trying to do.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just something about the Winter Games. It just feels different. It has a different attitude.
I always thought it's cross country skiing, and then you got to shoot a gun and hit the targets.
Is it a gun or was it archery?
No, it's a rifle.
rifle.
Yeah. and you have to hit the targets and
cross country skiing is like the most difficult thing to do. And like, I'm convinced, and I don't know if it's the most difficult sport in the world, but the endurance that you need and the coordination and the stamina, I mean, it's just insane.
Especially the best in the world.
Like, I was on the cross country ski team in high school, and I would get so exhausted that I would throw up at the end of practice. And it was really difficult, but it's a ton of fun. So I like watching,
especially at the end, right? When you get the straightaway, and then it's usually
it's like a mad dash.
It's a mad dash at the end, and they have to photo finish with
and they have like zero strength left at that point.
Oh,
I mean, they're totally spent. I don't even know what keeps them motivated at that point. Besides
the gold medal.
Yeah, exactly.
They want that gold.
I think the reason I also, if I can say this, one of the reasons why I like the Winter Olympics the best is because I like solo competition better than team sports.
Oh, yeah.
So
there are some team sports.
There are some team sports in the Winter Olympics.
You're going to have hockey and everything.
But so many of the events are just highlighting like the person's individual journey.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that more because team sports were always really intimidating for me as a kid.
Oh, yeah. I could, because you tried to play soccer at Kettle Moraine High School in Wisconsin.
Yeah, but I joined after everyone had been playing together for years.
That happens a lot.
And I just,
places. You lose I mean, one of the reasons to play sports, besides having a good time and having, getting exercise and things like that, is to just kind of enjoy yourself with something and maybe be outside if it's an outside sport. Be with your friends, kind of have a good time. I
like the idea
and learn something,
challenging your personal best.
Yeah.
I like that. That motivates me currently.
To be pushed away simply because you're not as good as somebody is annoying, because not everybody's going to be as good as you. Not everybody's going to put in the same training as you. I think it goes against the whole purpose of sports.
Well, it's not even about I actually wasn't bad at soccer. I was less experienced.
Well, you've kicked the ball around with me a couple times.
I was less experienced, and I didn't know enough about the rules of the game.
Yeah, and
there wasn't a lot of time taken to really explain that.
Coaches don't sometimes, if they're more worried about making state, they don't teach as much as they should.
They figure if you're playing in middle school, then you kind of are, if you're playing as like an 8th grader or a freshman in high school, they figure you already know the basics. You already know this, that, and the other thing. And the truth is, I didn't. All I was doing regularly, I would go to soccer camp every summer.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to be on a team until I was a little bit older. And by then, everybody had already known each other in the community for such a long time.
And sometimes the same families have been playing.
It's very intimidating.
People's daughters, and they played, and then they have sisters, and then they're going to play. You see a lot of the same names in some of these things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it pushes kids on. The truth of the matter is that there's a lot of kids willing to try sports, but they don't really have a means to do it until they're freshmen in high school. And they're kind of pushed away from it right away. And a lot of them don't
I thought it was
a shot.
Really annoying because, adults were always telling you to play sports, and gym teachers were always telling you to play sports because it was fun, and it was not about winning. It was about having fun together. And it's and then suddenly you're on a team in middle school or high school, and maybe the team has expectations because they tend to be good.
Yeah.
And then it's actually not about having fun at all. It's really honestly only about winning.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a shock. I wasn't really expecting that, because it's not like my parents were involved in this really. They weren't, I was kind of on my own with it. So it's not like I had any idea what to expect. And after doing it for a few years, I was like, it generally seems to me like this actually is all about winning, and I'm not really having fun.
Yeah, and that depends.
And even though I
had
friends on the team, but there wasn't time to enjoy any kind of camaraderie. It was basically catch up, know what you're doing, get on the same page as the rest of us.
If you make a mistake,
or
how dare you?
We're going to bench you, and you're just going to sit there and just.
I see it all the time, kids yelling at other kids, and I don't think that helps. I think it's they made a mistake. You need to be hey, like calmly?
Oh, my teammates were always very supportive of me. Like that, I never actually had anyone. Honestly, they were all very kind and
I've seen
just
some crazy things. And,
it was more that I just felt like there wasn't space for me to catch up.
Yeah.
Like no one was going to meet with me separately.
And they're supposed to have these other types of teams, and sometimes even they're competitive because the whole purpose of their B team and JV team is to build towards the varsity team to win state. Mm-hmm. So even though you're on the school's B team or C team, you're still expected to be really good and to know what's going on.
I just didn't want to hold everybody back. So
yeah, which is unfortunate. I hope more people can play sports and not have to worry about that.
I didn't always know what was going on in the game, to be honest with you. Yeah.
It's like home. If anyone knows the show Home Movies, you were like Melissa. Melissa on the court.
I'm in my own head a lot, and I don't.
There's a game going on.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit of a space cadet, and on top of that, I didn't really know a lot of the rules of soccer. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure why I didn't.
Well, but now you probably do because you watch games.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually understand the game a lot better now.
Yeah.
But when I was playing it, I was more focusing on, block the ball, block the ball, block the ball.
Yeah.
And so when things were happening upfield for me and I couldn't really see it, I was always looking for cues from other people, and they were all so sucked into the game that I was like,
you were missing your mark.
Yeah, I was just kind of the cue. I wasn't picking up on cues,
Yeah. But that happens to a lot of, and sometimes you just need an extra push, and sometimes it's not there, or it's not in the programs. It's just not in the way. Essentially, that's why I see kids transfer. Like I've seen kids transfer from big programs to go to other programs simply to get time to catch up, like you said.
Well,
and it works for them. Sometimes they end up being really good by the time.
The girls who were super successful on the team, like the stars of the team, they were always practicing together. And then the coach would have everyone else in a group.
Yeah.
And that just seems ineffective. It seems like the really successful players who make a lot of the shots that win the game should probably be
helping the others.
Yeah, or just there should be some kind of cohesion there.
Some of the best programs I've seen, that is what they do, because they want even the people on the bench. You might be the injuries happen. Sometimes someone gets a yellow or red card and you need somebody else to go in. Sometimes you get tired. There's, it's a fatigue sport. And sometimes if you're playing a team that maybe the game doesn't matter as much in the standings, like you want to get everybody else involved. So you want them to be on the same page. So I don't understand.
Well, you also want them to care about each other.
Yeah.
Because you're going to play better for people who you want to like.
Normally the captains do that. I've seen that. A lot of captains that I've seen are really good. And some of the teams that I've covered, a lot of the captains are really good at kind of getting everybody involved. And sometimes the captains on the team aren't the stars. The coach will purposely make the captain just someone who's good at speaking and getting everybody together.
Yeah.
And maybe they barely play it, but they play a huge role on the team. So they're just as important as the person scoring goals.
Right. Yeah, no one was ever like inhospitable to me. In fact, I remember multiple times when I was a really great defender in a game and I felt really supported by my teammates.
Yeah, and probably excited. Right?
They were very excited because I was shy.
Yeah.
I was shy and nervous.
This is another thing. Yeah.
And I was introverted and in that situation because I was so unfamiliar and unsure. And so I just eventually decided I had too much pressure from other parts of my life, trying to get into college, all that other stuff. And I was like, these girls, they're really good at what they do. They know each other really well. They're not going to miss me. Mm-hmm. This has been great. I'm going to sit my junior and senior year out, and that was a good choice because I got to just experience it, see what it was like. And then
take a step back.
Yeah.
I think the husky barking is a good way for us to kind of wrap things up here. I do want to finish up. Are you excited? I haven't read anything, but she's done it the last couple times. Leslie Jones maybe doing some Olympics commentary because it's been pretty golden the last several Olympics.
Yeah, I think someone should give her a show.
Yeah, definitely. Leslie Jones's Olympic show.
Yeah. I would much rather listen to her talk. In fact, I would really like for her to just be around all the time.
Instead of Bob Costas, No offense to Bob Costas, but sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to listen to this right now.
I mean, he's. I have nothing against him personally, but
No, he's
every now and then I wonder if he's on this planet.
I think a lot of it has to do with when you're an older journalist. Sometimes you get caught in that. He's great
just
at what he
loopy.
does.
He's
Bob Costas is Bob Costas. He's a Hall of Fame sports journalist.
Yeah.
But the thing is sometimes
he can kind of say whatever he can say these days. So
sometimes you want other people to come in, But I mean, it's been fun, right? I hope everyone else enjoyed listening to my fiance Alex here. Thanks so much for being on this month's show. I think we talked about a lot of cool things, don't you?
Yeah, it was pretty hard for me to sit here on camera, but I did the best I could.
It was also pretty random, guys. Remember, that's just coming out February 10th. Thanks to everyone who's been listening and supporting the SunDried Tomatoes podcast and YouTube channel. Thanks to everyone who subscribed, downloaded the podcast, liked and commented on YouTube as well. This wouldn't be possible with all of your support, and I really do appreciate it. Until next month, salut.